Have you ever thought of using a Melodica as an expressive MIDI controller? These things can be pretty fun, and I found a reasonably priced one on Amazon, so I decided to try it out. First, a very quick primer on MIDI expression. It's an absolutely essential tool in making our sequenced music feel more organic and expressive. Done well, it can really express a much wider dynamic range and contrast, and can make our emulation of sampled instruments so much more real. Let me put it this way, if I load up the sound of a trumpet and I just hit the note on a keyboard and I let it sit, after a while it becomes very obvious that this isn't a real trumpet because it's lacking the expressivity of breath and dynamic. You can also think about it this way. The difference between an instrument playing quietly and playing loud is not just a difference in volume, because real-world instruments have very different acoustic properties at the extremes of their dynamic ranges and everything in between. As a result of this, most of the good sampling companies will sample instruments at many different velocity levels in order to properly represent the sound of an instrument and make it possible for us to recreate realistic parts. Now, different manufacturers implement different preferences as far as how you control those things. But the most common way to do it is via MIDI control changes, or MIDI CCs. Sometimes it's MIDI CC1, which is the mod wheel, sometimes it's MIDI CC number 11, sometimes it's another number altogether. But the best of the sampled instruments always give us multiple ways to control dynamic range. Now, the simplest way that many people start off manipulating the dynamic range is simply the mod wheel or a fader or a knob on their controller. This can work pretty well, but it does take a little bit of practice because with one hand, you're playing the note, and with the other hand, you're turning a knob or raising or lowering a fader to represent the dynamic range that you want to play. If your primary MIDI controller doesn't have knobs or faders, it's pretty easy to add them via external USB devices. For a long time, I used this cheap little Korg NanoKontrol, bought it used for like 20 or 30 bucks, then I spray painted it black so it would look a little bit more professional and less plastic. But it does the job pretty well with several faders and knobs that can be completely programmed to what you need. A modern version of this NanoKontrol runs about $100 nowadays. Of course, cheaper used if you want to get into that, but it can be a really nice entry-level tool. And there are some nicer, more upscale competitors to the Korg NanoKontrol out there. If you're interested in that, you might want to check out units like the Novation Launch Control XL. This one runs about 250 bucks. And then you can get really fancy with upscale models like the SSL UF8, which offers motorized faders and runs at just over $1,000. Some people opt to achieve the same result by using MIDI volume pedals. This can be an economical way to control volume. For example, you can find a very basic M-Audio EXP pedal for about 30 bucks, or a bigger, more solid variant from Roland called their EV5 that runs around 90 bucks. Units like those allow foot-controlled dynamic swelling, and the particular upside of using those is you have two hands free to play your MIDI keyboard. One downside of using the foot pedals, and this is from my personal experience, I found it a little bit harder to get used to my foot controlling volume while simultaneously playing notes. It is a bit of a two-tiered solution that requires your brain to work in a different way, and I didn't always find it completely natural. Now, if you have a background in either wind or brass instruments, you might be thinking, well, it would be great to use my breath to control the sound and give it expression. That's the aim of these wind controller devices built by Akai and other similar manufacturers. They mimic the feel of a clarinet or a saxophone, and they use similar fingerings. And there have been artists who've built their entire careers off playing these MIDI wind controllers. There's also a really interesting device from the Swedish company TeControl, who offers this MIDI breath controller device that has some different dimensions available for its control. You not only breathe into it, but you can also vary your bite strength and your head tilt, and the system can be programmed to control your MIDI instruments throughout all these dimensions. This breath controller runs about 269 euros, and if you're in the US like I am, it's probably about 330 bucks by the time it reaches here. So there are various options on the market, all the way from cheap to expensive, but when I saw this thing on Amazon, I was like, I gotta give this a try. It's from a company called TAHORNG, and it's called the WindKey. It can be powered via battery or USB-C. Now, at its most basic level, you actually can play it like a melodica. It's got 10 built-in sounds and a built-in speaker, and you can use it just like that if you want to play around. But the killer extra feature that's unique to this model is that it does function as a MIDI keyboard with expression. You can turn off the internal sounds, and you can then play it as a MIDI controller. Let me show you that. So right here, I've got a Spitfire Audio BBCSO cello sustain patch loaded, fresh out of the box, a little bit of reverb added, but I'm just going to see what I can make this thing do. Here we go. Next up, I'm going to try controlling a violin section from the same library, but this one is legato, so I'm going to play some melodic lines and see how they connect. You know, as I use this and as I experiment with playing it, there really is something uniquely connective between me and this instrument. Even though I'm not playing a real violin with a real bow or anything like that, the fact that I'm using my air and my body to control it like that, it's a lot different than it is doing the traditional way of MIDI sequencing with a controller keyboard and a knob or something like that to control volume or expression. This feels more like playing the real instrument. So in line with that, let me try a solo trumpet patch. Similar, I was a high school trumpet player, so I remember what that feels like. Let's see what I can make this one do. Now, I do want to say there is still significant variance from sample library to sample library in different manufacturers in terms of how well they respond to a breath controller like this. A lot of it does depend on how well the library was recorded and programmed, how the velocity layers are set up, and how seamless the crossfading can be from one velocity layer to the next. Some patches perform very realistically, others you can kind of feel it going in and out from under you as you play it. But I also think this is part of the game. Like, you have to learn to play these instruments. You have to practice playing these instruments in order to get the results you want. No one should ever expect to plug in something like this and just get magical, instantaneous, perfect results first time out. This is like learning a new instrument. That said, I will say this is a very promising approach to programming expressive MIDI performances. Other features worth noting, it is a nice, very lightweight, compact 37-key keyboard, perfect for traveling if you need a keyboard to travel with. You can disconnect the Wind controller part if you don't want to use that, and you can just use it as a MIDI controller. And you can find it on Amazon for about $149. By the way, I forgot to mention, this video is not sponsored in any way. I have no connection with this company. They did not send me a free one, nothing like that. I was just really curious to try it out. So as I alluded to before, this kind of sits sort of in the middle range price-wise of the solutions for expressive MIDI controllers. If you have a mod wheel or faders and knobs built into your keyboard, then it's basically free. You could use those. If you want to step it up beyond that, you could get a basic MIDI volume pedal or a used Korg NanoKontrol in the $30 to $50 range. Or if you're looking to move towards wind solutions, this would be the most economical wind solution I've found so far. And I think it works quite well. Do let me know if you've had a chance to try this unit, or if you have your own solutions for MIDI expression programming. I'd love to learn from you. Leave your tips below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you on the next one.